bills. I think you heard the long list that was introduced. Our staff's been very, very busy. Some people think this is a 40-day, 45-day session. It's anything but. We work all year putting together policies, ideas, trying to refine those, and you heard a lot of those ideas and bills right in today. So with that, I'm going to open it up. So do we have any questions?
This afternoon, you guys are going to face a Medicaid protest. What you going to do with Medicaid?
Why don't we hold that question? Senator Hemmer's coming back in. I'm going to have him ask that, okay? Answer that, okay? He's been working on that, and I'd like him here to answer that question. If you just wait 1 second, okay?
So maybe talk about, as taking over your new roles, your priorities moving into the next 45 days.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, that in our December caucus, we asked senators to come up with their priorities. And we actually had an opportunity to speak with the minority caucus and ask what your priorities. And these weren't bills, they weren't individual issues, but they were actually what we call big gear items. The priorities they came up with: education, number one; infrastructure. And we're growing. We've got a lot of challenges as far as what growth presents us. So more infrastructure, economic development. When we talked back at economic development, one of the concerns was taking care of the existing businesses and our air quality. I mentioned air quality in my speech because I think it's such a significant part of not only our environment and what we enjoy as Utahns, but also our ability to attract other people to come to the state. We talked about tax reform. There's been a lot of talk about the fact in the 60s and 70s, 70% of our GDP came from things we buy: furniture, cars, lawnmowers, and now that's down to 40%. We know we've got a problem. We used to buy our lawnmower, now we have our lawns mowed. The mowing of the lawn doesn't have a sales tax related to it. The buying the lawnmower does. So as we see that problem, I'm not sure we have all the solutions for it, but I think we know we have a problem, and I think we're probably going to try to work to try to fix it.
Speaker Wilson today upped the sales tax cut from $200 to $225 million. What do you think of a $225 million tax cut?
I think we'll talk about it. That's part of the process. So,
Okay.
Go ahead.
What about broadening the base? When people talk about broadening the base to what? So lawns being mowed, haircuts, what?
That's part of the discussion. And whenever we get a problem, we have to send it through a refining process. So if I knew those answers, I'd tell it to you. But the answer is, we're going to take it through the public process, take it through the committee hearing. We're going to have stakeholders on all sides of it weigh in on it. One thing that I found from bringing up that subject is that no one wants to be taxed. Everyone wants their neighbor to be taxed. And that's not uncommon. So we're going to have a tough time figuring this out, but we're going to go after it.
It's being billed as a tax cut. But if you tax services, is it really a tax hike?
Well, on some services it may be, on some things that we do, but overall it will be a tax cut. And if the majority of Utahns see a tax decrease, that is a tax cut.
And that, you think, will happen even if you broaden the base in tax services?
That's what we're trying to do.
So, just to be clear, you have not signed off on a $225 million tax cut, but the House is proposing that? Has the Senate talked about this yet?
We haven't talked yet, but I assume we will if you put it in a speech.
So it's not something that you've heard before? You heard that for the first time today, that 225? Why do you think you haven't already discussed that yet?
We probably haven't gotten on speed dial with one another yet.
Is that something that you think might be realistic, though? I mean, we're talking about $200 million net tax cut in the governor's budget. Is that realistic, 225?
If you remember, over the years, we've tried to broaden the base, we've tried to do tax reform. As we go through that process, we see there are all types of different effects, sometimes unintended consequences. To try to actually fixate on an exact amount, I think that's problematic on the first day of the session. I think we're gonna try to get there, but exactly how it's gonna end up, we've got a lot of ground to plow, we've got a lot of things to do. We're a ways from making those final decisions.
Mr. President, what services do you think should be taxed that aren't right now?
You know, I haven't gone that far yet, so when I get there, I'll tell you.
How about the other senators in the room? What services do you think should be taxed that aren't?
Well, let me say, the same thing. We've had the task force, a group of senators working with House members and trying to put together some policy, trying to decide what some of those things could be. But as a general body and even as joint leadership, whether it be with the House and the Senate, we have not had those kind of discussions yet. So it's hard for us to answer some of those questions. We haven't had those discussions yet. We've been working up to day one on the Senate side. They've been working up to day one on the House side. Now we'll move forward with, broadening the discussions and getting involved in that. So I apologize, but I can't really give you that. I'm certainly not gonna talk about it until I have the details.
Are there any concerns that with that as you start looking at taxing services, that you're gonna see that this is gonna be a lot tougher because you're gonna see everybody's little exemptions that they wanna preserve, everybody's little pork projects get saved?
So being tougher, you're right. So I think Senator Hammond had a comment, because as you make any type of tax changes, it will be tough. This is not an easy lift. Go ahead.
You're exactly right. It's gonna be hard. There's a lot of little exemptions out there and a lot of, if I can use this analogy, sacred cows. And we wanna be careful to make sure that what we do is broad and fair and that we aren't carving out certain groups that should be included. But I also wanna say something else. The sentiment that services are not taxed today is inaccurate. I am a dry cleaner. My business, we clean clothes. We provide a service. We collect and remit sales tax. And so this continuous analogy or this statement that we don't tax services is a little bit misleading or inaccurate, and if we expand it to include more services, I think that's the right way to do it, not to say we're taxing services, because some services are collecting and remitting sales tax.
What more services would you suggest be taxed that aren't?
For me, I'd be interested in looking at professional services. That's a whole big, broad area, but I'm not running the bill, and we'll work with the bill sponsors to see where they end up, but that is a large service category that does not collect and remit sales
Does
tax.
that include doctors?
Potentially, anything's on the table and everything's on the table.
So we have Senator Hammond back, so why don't we move to the Medicaid question?
Yeah, well, we got 3 bills, certainly, it sounds like. 4.
Democrats have bills.
Democrats have a bill too, okay. Well, maybe by the end of the day, we'll be up to 5 or 6.
Or 7 or 8.
So, which bill is gonna make it, really? You've got a repeal entirely, you've got caps and potentially fee waivers and a work requirement. You've got maybe a hybrid of all of them. You've probably got the Democrats' expansion, just take it as it is. Which one's going through?
Something in the middle of everything you just said. We had 104 members of these bodies, right? 105, excuse me, I wasn't counting myself. 104 other members. 103. Okay, 104 total, thank you. So 104 total members in these 2 bodies. I can't predict how they're all gonna vote. Jesus, that's a hard question. I think somewhere in the middle is the best I can get you. Somewhere between full Prop 3 expansion and I think Senator Andrieux's full repeal bill. So there's probably something in the middle that we settle on that makes sense. I think we've heard, I think I'm speaking for folks in this room, we've heard the people that they want to increase expansion. They're willing to do that with a tax increase. And at the same time, we have a responsibility to manage a budget and balance a budget. And it feels like those could be a conflict, but maybe they're not a conflict, and we can figure out a solution that accomplishes both, that leaves us in charge of our budget, but that expands coverage to more people.
So why not wait and see if there is a conflict before you respond?
Wait, conflict where? Oh, between
With
those
the
two
budget,
things?
yeah.
We have to make
I mean,
our,
it's based on projections at this point.
and we have to make decisions based on those projections. Could the projections be wrong? Absolutely. Could they be right? Perhaps. But we have to make decisions based on the information we have available to us.
So I think there's a commitment that hopefully nobody's, I mean, you see some bills are full repeal, but I think most legislators are committed to cover the full 138% of poverty. But again, as Senator Hemmert indicated, we have to do it in a fiscally prudent way. Utah, as I mentioned, has been recognized as one of the best managed states in the nation. We don't get that designation from not managing our affairs well. And we have to look at the financial impact of this and try to make it work as efficiently as possible. There was a hospital tax. The referendum eliminated that. That's a great revenue source to be able to extend coverage for those in need. Do we not look at that hospital tax? There's an automatic inflation rate in it. That creates a great financial burden if we inflate year over year. That's something we'll look at. Again, trying to make sure that it's financially, fiscally sustainable and not just at the immediate, solves our immediate need. I think that's our responsibility of legislators, is to look out into the future. We've got a $1.3 billion budget, and we'll talk about how we might want to spend that, because I think we're going to be careful of how we spend that $1.3 billion, just like we're careful with how we expand Medicaid.
So if I understand you correctly, none of the bills that are currently public are really blessed by leadership here.
I'm not sure any of them are, okay? There's a lot of them out there. We're working on solutions, though.
So there is a bill that leadership is working on, leadership House, leadership Senate, and the governor's office, right?
There's concepts.
Yes.
And
The
hopefully
majority,
we get it.
But, and I think those concepts are cover 138%, trying to enact it on April 1, and then trying to be physically conservative is the way we do that.
What is the
So
sort
are
of
you saying you
minority
guys are being left out?
Yeah.
Senator
Yes,
Escamilla?
we are in that conversation. So we are, I mean, the Democrats are, I think the feeling, and I can't speak for the House minority, but in our conversations with them, is we're gonna stand behind Prop 3. There are creative ways, you're absolutely right, the president, they've missed some funding that some of our bills will be bringing forward, but we're looking forward to that conversation because we wanna make sure the public and the constituents in the state of Utah feel like their voices were heard, and we're gonna protect as much of Prop 3 as possible. And that's our commitment as a minority caucus.
Is there any give for you on top 3?
No, I mean, the funding, I mean, there are pieces that they were not in there, and the implementation may need some tweaking, but we want the full Medicaid extension, and we think we can do that. And the other states, there's only 18 states that have not done it. The other states the funding is not creating the chaos that they were predicted or they were projected. So we're hoping that we will also work with our fiscal analyst office on those projections and make sure they're as accurate as possible.
So get ready for the refinement. It's going to go through the process. Okay.
Would you guys back anything if they came to a sweet spot? Would you shift your position behind, would the minority caucus shift its position behind full Medicaid expansion?
That's tough to answer. I mean, I think our constituents are pretty clear, and you know, we are elected by our constituents, and they feel this is, we've been talking about making sure that it's sustainable, because that's important. And if they're missing funding, we will go and fight for more funding, but we want to make sure that people feel that their vote is being counted and is being respected.
Other questions?
Can we talk about the new building, the new state office building? Where is the money coming from for that? And where has this idea come from? This seems all of a sudden today, this came out. I heard kind of a hush in the Senate as it was
Capital
announced.
Preservation Board voted a couple of weeks ago to actually recommend a new parking terrace. The parking terrace they recommended was just east of the new state office building. You know, parking's an issue. Anybody, you know, maybe some get preferential spots. Senators, we were able to get parking, but we think it's really challenging for the public to be able to find a spot to park here. So I think there's broad consensus by Capital Preservation Board and others that we need to have more parking. But as we look at that, this complex is such a significant spot that we want to do it right. And everybody looks at just adding a parking terrace as perhaps a Band-Aid on the complex, that in reality, back when the Capitol was renovated, they did a totally new master plan. And part of that master plan was actually dropping the state office building and rebuilding another one similar to the other buildings around the campus. And the parking structure doesn't tie well with anything because it's set off and alone. So if we're gonna expand parking, we think it's better to do it right. And then we're also talking about a new agricultural building. And as we look at the new building, we're looking at space management. What agencies, what resources should be on Capitol Hill? What is convenient to be here? What agencies and what resources maybe ought to be in a new building elsewhere? And we think this is a time, as we're looking at rebuilding agricultural buildings and maybe looking at parking, to look at a more holistic approach so we get it right.
But that's a
President,
lot of
what
money,
about-
isn't it?
I think we budgeted a lot of money for buildings, ongoing money last year.
Hundreds of millions, right?
And it may or it may not be, but we're not sure whether this will be done this year, next year, or be done over a period of time, but I think it's time to work on it.
How do we reconcile our commitment to public transportation, air quality associated with that, and the idea of inviting a whole lot more cars up to the Capitol campus? How do we reconcile that?
You know, I think the cars are here anyway, but I think we have a commitment, I think you've seen the commitment last session to public transportation. We've actually started a brand new fund. Senator Harper ran the bill, actually put the expansion, many of the projects under UDOT. So we're trying to look at what is the best way to get from here to there. We're looking at whether that's public transit or whether it's surface transportation. We're trying to consolidate that, so we're not moving vehicles, we're moving people. And what is the most efficient way to move people, not just vehicles. So I don't think we're gonna lose that focus, but again, I think we're gonna need the parking here regardless.
So you are from Davis County. Speaker Wilson is from Davis County. Does Davis County now rule in the legislature?
You know, I've got next to me another senator from
Right.
Davis County.
Exactly.
And, you know, Senator Stevenson and Wilson, they ran and did the prison, the inland port. I was involved in a downtown hotel. I was involved in the expansion when I was in the House of the Salt Palace. I don't think you're gonna see anybody rule. That isn't the way it works up here. In fact, if anything, we're probably gonna be more sensitive to what happens north because of where we're at. So, no, I don't think so.
Maybe because of that question right there you just asked.
Yeah. So thank you for asking.
One of the proposals that is out there already on extending taxes to more services beyond dry cleaning is both ride sharing like Lyft and Uber, as well as streaming services like Netflix and Hulu and those. Is that something that has appeal over here? Those kinds of things? I understand that's part of what the working group's looking at.
Yeah, Senator Hemmert, and Senator Maine just come in, so Senator Maine, why don't you go over here so they can see you? Right behind Senator Ibsen, but go ahead. We'll want to make sure you're there. Senator Hemmert, go ahead.
So I think the answer to that is, I think the best way to answer that is everything is on the table and anything is on the table. And it's gonna get refined, but, so those are someone was asking earlier about what services, that's another great example. Those are services that absolutely we would look at to ask them to collect and remit sales tax from the people to whom they're providing those services. And I'll just say it again, I think any and every service is on the table. Again, I don't think anyone in this room is running these bills, but those who are running them in the House and the Senate will be looking at everything and trying to figure out what doesn't make sense from a practicality perspective. I know someone brought up doctors. I know Senator Vickers over here runs a pharmacy, and he's mentioned there's some practicality issues with collecting and remitting sales tax on drugs that you buy at a pharmacy. So that has to be part of this thought process, what is practicable. But I think the short answer to any question on what services is everything is on the table.
But when you're talking about something like ride sharing, you're talking about individuals, you know, the gig economy, right? As opposed to a business like your own. And you're adding this extra layer of bureaucracy to work for those people to gather taxes, right? Is that part of the discussion? And what do you say to those folks who are just trying to make a few extra bucks?
That is part of the discussion, is how will we impose this duty, frankly, to collect and remit sales tax? And that is part of the conversation, because it has to be doable.
And again, we know we've got a problem. We hope we have a lot of people trying to fix it with us, help us fix it. So
One more comment on that, if I could. you know, the focus has really been on sales tax. The governor kind of threw that gauntlet out there with, you know, the budget and talking about, and everybody seems to be focused on, and it's really easy to say, I found this, it's really easy to say, let's broaden the base and lower the rate, but as you start into those discussions, it's really difficult. But that's also why part of this working group is also looking at the income tax and what we need to do there. If there's a potential to reduce the income tax as well, or in addition to, or instead of. So those are all things, as Senator Hammond said, everything's on the table, including this component.
Senator, Mr. President, you said we have a problem.
Yes.
For people who might suggest, how big a problem could you have with a $1.3 billion surplus? You able to respond how?
Our money guy.
First of all, the number we should be using today is not 1.3, it's 1.1. 200's gone. And then if you go back and look at what we did in the special session, and you look at some of the other things that we did, the EAC did, that's just a number everyone's kicking around. That's not there, and it may not be there. Those are estimated revenues, they're not for sure.
Okay, for people who say you got a $1.1
Well,
billion surplus, how big a problem do we really have?
I think the thing we need to do is get the right number to them, and we really don't know what that is yet.
So what are your budget numbers now?
We don't have those numbers all here right now. That number was thrown out the first part of December, 1.3 billion, and I'm not sure the word surplus should ever be used in state budgeting.
That was a consensus number though, wasn't it, with the governor's
It was
office?
a
and
consensus number, but
legislative?
it wasn't surplus. It's estimated increased revenues is what it is.
Well,
And so-
And can we talk about trends
Yeah,
in
go
our
ahead.
economy?
Thanks.
I mean, we have great staff, economists, PhDs that are telling us to be cautious because they follow the trends for the last 30, 40 years, and we may be hitting a small recession. I mean, just based on the history and the trends, and we have to be cautious because we have to look ahead, and I will be also very scared to say we have $100 million to spend on one, you know, we have concerns, and that's why I think the priorities of saying education and infrastructure are critical, and I'm going back to our constituents, we're talking about those trends, and we are saying we're gonna be very careful how we spend money, because we may not have it
May
next
I
year.
speak to follow up with my colleague? I think we need that one-time money. We have to be cautious of this, because if we have a project that we can finish, that's fine, but if we put programs in place that are ongoing, and we might not have the money to fulfill that mission, we need to be really careful. There's a difference in my mind as a project and a program. Programs need long-term money or forever money. So we need to, whatever we put in place, we need to make sure we can fund it, and if we have a project that we can, a building or whatever that, to spend that kind of money on, then that's short-term money that we can do it and make sure that's taken care of. But I'm concerned about, we need to watch the money that's long-term, so we need to make sure that we can fund what we put in place.
Are you concerned, Senator, that we are headed into a recession, like your colleagues here?
Well, we're cautious because we have good, skilled people that have spoken to us about their concern. And if they're concerned, who knows what's going to happen, but they have a finger to the wind. And so we need to take heed of that and just be cautious and know what we're doing, because we don't want to, we've been through that before, and it was disastrous for our state, disastrous for our nation.
So again, our revenue sources are very little property tax, if any. Property tax is very stable. Our revenue sources are income tax and sales tax. Income tax is dedicated for education. Sales tax is our general fund. And when you talk about that 1.3 billion, we're seeing large growth in income tax, very small growth in general fund. If we allow the general fund to dry up and go away, and we have a constitutional mandate that income tax go to education, you can see the crisis that will cause. And so it's not the income tax we're worried about, because it's growing very, very well. It's our general fund sales tax, and that's what we have to solve. Or we'll be trying to pull more money out of income tax, trying to solve those general fund needs that we have. We fund our entire state budget, other than education, on sales tax. It's like a roller coaster. It goes up fast and down fast.
President, we're hearing that cannabis bills are on hold this session, that leadership's agreed not to do anything else on medical cannabis, is that?
I think there was a general consensus that the the broad-based policy of cannabis or the marijuana issues would be, we take a breather. There may have to be some tweaking, there's always some things that have been done that may have to be refined, but generally speaking, I think, and Senator Vickers, I'm gonna let speak to that, so he's kind of the guy.
Well, as far as, I think the concern would be, coming out of that working group that put together the compromise bill we passed in special session, was that we did not want to make any major changes in policy. Now, there are, because of the nature of that bill, it's very prescriptive, so it's a line-by-line bill, so there's going to be some things that have to be corrected. But as far as putting everything on hold, as far as the Senate side at least, we haven't made that decision yet, but what we do look at would be fairly minor in detail. And I know Senator Escamilla is working on that as well, as a member of the House. So.
Like the indemnification for state employees.
Right. And
So
the
no-
Senate confirmation.
But we're not gonna see any more like major modifications to the bill. You want like a cooling off period.
That's,
We need to get it in place, get it up and running, and then, and also there's provisions in place to get feedback, for example, on condition lists and those kind of things that we can look at as we go proceed forth with the policy and get it in place and running. So.
but I think like any other policy we put in place, it'll probably get refined from now until forever.
Yeah.
One more quick one on Medicaid, if that's okay. What is the budget shortfall dollar-wise, and when might that kick in?
Ask that again,
What is in terms of, in dollars, what's the budget shortfall, and when would that kick in on Medicaid?
So the projections I've seen, I'm probably gonna misspeak and you're gonna get beat up over this, but
Or just
I
say-
believe it's 2 years, $10–11 million shortfall, 4 years, $65 million shortfall from the property tax alone. Does that sound right to people?
yeah, let me get you, let's get you the data.
Yeah, let's get
Yeah,
that.
let's get it for you, okay?
Yeah, that would be great.
All right.
But there is a projected shortfall, and I think that is also consensus.
But that's
between you
based
and
on the Prop 3 that we
Correct.
left outside, for example, the hospital piece.
Correct.
Which, that's why we're trying to be proactive and bring that forward. So that's some of our bills on the Democrat side, but yeah, there's, in that projections, there's a shortfall, but we think we could also bring some funding in.
I think there's some common ground we can find.
Let's do one more question.
Back there. One more question and we'll be.
One more on the sales
And
tax,
again,
if I can.
before we get the last question, we're gonna continue with media availability. Appreciate you being here. It's really, really important, we think, to have our constituents know, and you're a great part of that. So even the hard questions. Robert, you got one?
So you had a task force about 2 years ago, I think, on tax reform.
Yes.
They didn't really get into the sales tax on services, as I understand it. And so, given how nebulous this is, we've got 45 days and you're kind of scratching the surface on it. Is it realistic to completely overhaul the sales tax structure in the next 6 weeks?
We've done some amazing things, and I've never seen a Hail Mary caught if it's not thrown. So we need, whatever it takes, I think you have to go after it, and you have to try. So it looks like it's hard, it's very difficult, it's a heavy lift, but we're gonna go after it and see if we can't get it done.
Good question, though.
Nice analogy.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
I know the headline.
You enjoy it, we want to involve you. There's no way we'll ever.